And it's time for today's extra special. We tackle a topic that has been on everyone's mind, especially after recent global health crisis, and that is vaccinations. In a world where diseases can spread across borders faster than ever, vaccines have become one of our best lines of defense. But here's a pressing question. Why does Africa, a continent with over 1 billion people, still rely on so heavily on imported vaccines? And what would it take for Africa to become self-sufficient in vaccine production?
Well, to help us understand this better, we are indeed thrilled to be joined by Dr. Alero Roberts, Associate Professor, College of Medicine, UNILAG, that's University of Lagos. Also joining us is Dr. Phillip Njemanze, Chairman, International Institute of Advanced Research and Training, Chidicon Medical Center. Thank you so much, distinguished gentleman and, of course, lady, for joining us this very beautiful Sunday morning. First off, just on a lighter note, I hope we didn't interrupt your service this morning.
Not really.
Certainly did.
I know we did, but of course, it's a call to duty. Well, thank you for honoring our invitation. I think this conversation is very, very, very key, especially now that we have been clamoring for vaccine production here in Africa. But let's start off with our very first question. Let's look at the COVID-19 pandemic, which ordinarily and clearly highlighted significant global disparities in vaccine access. I mean, with African nations facing severe shortages and delays, could you start by explaining why Africa has been so dependent on foreign vaccine manufacturers like Moderna and the likes, and how this impacts public health outcomes on the continent? I'd like to start with you first, Dr. Alero.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And yes, you certainly did interrupt my Sunday service, but like you said, it's a call to duty. So here we are. Great. So the truth of the matter is that Africa's dependence on the foreign vaccine production is a result of decades of underinvesting in local factories, underfunding the education sector that could have and should have produced the skills that are needed. We have to remember that producing vaccines is complicated, requiring a lot of high-tech equipment, strict quality checks, a steady supply chain, including power, all things that are really not fully developed in many African countries. And like you said, the COVID-19 pandemic exposed the underbelly of our weakened underbelly, because when the global demand grew, wealthier countries prioritized vaccinating their own population, and the shortages meant that many African countries simply couldn't vaccinate their own people, which made the pandemic last longer and hurt both local and global public health and the economy. So we must develop the ability to produce vaccines locally. Let me just debunk a myth here, because this is a perfect opportunity. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and all these other development partners have no need to use vaccines to do anything nefarious to the African population. As we can see, all they need to do is withhold vaccines, and we'll depopulate ourselves.
That's a strong one there. They need to just withhold vaccines. Is that what you say?
That's what this is what COVID-19 showed us.
Now, Doctor,
think about it very carefully. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, let's switch now to Dr. Njemanze and have your reaction to Dr. Alero's submissions.
Yes, thank you for having me. And I would like to actually take us back a little bit. Africa invented vaccination. Actually, it's one of the things that went from traditional medicine to modern medicine. You will remember that if you go to African villages, you will still see scarification. Scarification is a form of vaccination. Yes, people talk about its traditional importance, making marks and all that. But if you go today, even today, to places like Edo State, with people with splenomegaly, so when there is an infection that is affecting the immune system, the spleen grows big. And you will see that most of these people carry scarifications, and it seems to do some good for that. So, and that the whole concept of exposing somebody in a controlled manner to environmental microbes so that the person will produce antibodies is actually what is underlying scarification as a health procedure. So we cannot say that there is no indigenous knowledge about vaccination. It was just done differently in our own traditional ways. Now, the modern issue of vaccination and why we should have our own indigenous system of production of modern vaccines, because vaccines are national security issues. No matter how good is intention by any international organization, any other country, any country that chooses can use vaccination to wipe out a whole nation. And it can be done so easily by just putting a vaccine contaminant. So why would any nation submit its whole population to this type of danger? So that is why in almost all countries, there is the effort to produce vaccines or have their own indigenous methods to license that vaccine and reproduce it in their own country. So this is why it is of great importance. You know, we remember in the 70s when there was all this thing about cholera vaccine, and which was invented by a Nigerian professor, Obinjoko. So we actually have the indigenous knowledge, but the political will to organize, leaving out all the so-called international networks of supply and do our own, because it is national security. Nobody who is in their right mind of leadership can outsource vaccination to other countries. It shouldn't be done. So that's why we should produce our own vaccines in Nigeria. If India can do it, we can do it also. So I think the problem has been the politics of it, and the lack of political will.
Right. So for the both of you, you're almost towing the same line, but again, painting very dire and maybe grotesque, picture. A nation can wipe out an entire continent if they choose to do so, by bio weapon with vaccination. So political will then is the issue, because we've seen a push from various stakeholders, including the African Union, to encourage vaccine production here and on the continent. What progress has been made so far? And what do you think is then the holdup when it comes to political will, if we're seeing various stakeholders like the AU calling and encouraging for vaccine production here on the continent? I'll start with you, Dr. Alero.
Well, yes, there have been encouraging progress, largely thanks to commitments from the African Union, like you said, and partnerships with international stakeholders. There are a few I can think of, like the Pasteur Institute in Senegal, the BioVac in South Africa, both of which are being involved in the production of COVID-19 vaccines, as well as other essential vaccines. And of course, Nigeria and Egypt are also expanding their pharmaceutical capacities in this regard to be able to produce vaccines, but the mRNA vaccines are easier. Then you've got a partnership between BioVac and Pfizer, Moderna to produce the mRNA vaccine, and that way we're building momentum, and with sustained investment and technical support, we can contribute to the global vaccine supply. However, like you quite rightly said, when we're talking about political will, there needs to be a lot more of put your money where your mouth is, and not just the mouthing of it and the words and the beautiful speeches that are written with pretty PowerPoints, that take place at international dialogues. We need to actually be able to put our money where our mouth is, and actually, I can never, the minute this thing came up, I recall going to school all those many decades ago, don't ask. And there was a federal vaccine production center there, right there in Yaba. And that's how we were able to contribute significantly to the eradication of smallpox.
That's deep, though. I mean, that's like way back. Let me come to you, Dr. Njemanze.
Not that way back. I'm not that old.
Sorry. I like where this is going. All right, let me go to Dr. Njemanze. I have just two questions. I think these two questions I'd like you to touch on it first, and maybe we can go back to Dr. Alero. My first question simply is there an exit of international interest? Let me use that word, because we do recall that late 2001, Moderna had said it was going to build a vaccine factory in Kenya. And this news excited Africans because finally East Africa was going to be a home where vaccines could actually circulate to the rest part of Africa. But we do know that this did not happen. What do you think attributed to that exit or the stop of creating that vaccine center for East Africa and, of course, cut across the other part of Africa? That's my first question. My second question is, we did also see a syringe company in Akwa Ibom, the largest in Nigeria, where they were producing syringes and so on. And all of a sudden, many have blamed the government of not supporting them, hence why they've exited the scene. Do you think it's also a problem for Africa? We're not willing, the willingness is not there. These are my two-part questions. So first off, I'm talking about Moderna, the United States company. Secondly, I'm talking about Africans not even honing or supporting our own. For example, the syringe company in Akwa Ibom. Dr. Njemanze, I'd like you to go, please.
Yes, I remember the incident about Moderna, and because that was actually flight to actually calm the vaccine hesitancy that was increasingly growing in Africa. And then the fact that the production could be moved to Africa seemed to be welcome development. However, I think we have to go beyond all these foreign investors coming to do things for us. Africans are the most innovative people on earth. We created human civilization. The Africans are the oldest people you have on earth. People don't know this. You have Africans living. The Caucasians are only 6,000 to 7,000 years. Africans have been living for hundreds of thousands of years. So we created human civilization. The innovation is there. But what has happened is that our governments have failed. The present governments have failed to recognize the ingenuity of African intellectuals and creativity of the African entrepreneur. So this is what needs to be driven. This is what needs incentives have to be given. The government must not look at the private enterprise as just a way to extract taxes. They should look at the private enterprise. In Europe, they give subsidies to companies. That's why the companies grow. People just have intellectual property, and then they go and they're giving funds from government. This should be happening here. If anybody wants to set up a vaccine factory, the government should underwrite, use the taxpayers' money, make sure that the initial capital expenditure is made until that company grows. And you are going to see vaccines for almost everything, and we'll be exporting vaccines from Nigeria across Africa and across the world. So the innovation, the private enterprise initiative that is here is what the present governments have been looking outside. You know, somebody looking at something that in Sokoto when the thing is in his Sokoto. So it is the problem of the government. We have to change this governance mindset that the best things will come from abroad. No, we should look inwards and see the enormous creativity of our people, even in vaccine. And I'm telling you, there are many enterprises which will start today. Should government announce that they are going to say, let's give 100 million naira to any company which is going to start a vaccine industry, you will see about 10 vaccine industries which will spring up successful in the next 10 years.
That's interesting.
Very interesting there. Dr. Alero, I'm going to if you want to reply or if you have any comments regarding Joe's question, please go ahead because I have a question for you.
Well, the only thing that I'm going to add to this is that as a public health physician, of course, in the entirety of the health sector, from service delivery to utilization, research and development, teaching, developing, questioning, regulating, collaboration is essential. And these international partnerships, we must admit, bring in critical technology transfer, which we have failed to develop over the last 45 years. That's just the fact of the matter on ground. They bring in technical expertise, they bring in funding that supports us to establish and maintain manufacturing capabilities. So yes, while I would love to see a situation where we can throw out all international donor funding, everybody knows my opinion on international donor funding. The truth of the matter is that at this point in time, we need to be able to leapfrog our journey to self-sufficiency. And for that reason, we need to be able to collaborate.
But
you had a question, ma'am.
Yes, I'm so glad you had to bring collaboration into this, because vaccines aren't just expensive, right, to produce when you think about it. When you look at the cost of it, there's a lot of science that goes into it, which is, the testing and everything else before they come to a particular dose, a particular formula, and then mass produce it for it to be sold. There's a lot of scientists behind the closed doors that I've been doing the testing for years. So they are expensive to begin with before being mass produced. And then they are costly to distribute as well, especially in areas with limited infrastructure or even a supply chain that like in Nigeria. Every other place it works, but Nigeria has its own peculiarities. Nigeria, as we always say. And so to that, I ask you, in terms of partnership and, funding strategies, if you are saying remove the donors or the shoestrings, we have to bootstrap ourselves, what would that look like? Give us, strategy for that.
Well, the truth of the matter is, like you said, there are huge supply chain challenges across the health sector. This impacts service delivery, vaccine accessibility. You're thinking of the cold chain infrastructure. We're thinking of transportation. We're thinking of distribution network. We're thinking of security. Nigeria is Nigeria. Let's be very factual and honest. But there are a few initiatives that we can talk about. And the African Union has what they call the African Vaccine Acquisition Task Team, AVATT. And then they partner with organizations such as Gavi, the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization, WHO, and the Africa CDC to provide vital support for logistics and distribution. Then there is the funding. Who's paying for all of this? So various African countries are now exploring public-private partnerships that they can implement to fund and scale these operations by addressing particularly supply chain barrier. And so these partnerships are still crucial to ensuring that the vaccines reach every community effectively and efficiently.
All right, Dr. Njemanze, it would be a disservice if we have this conversation on vaccines and we don't touch on the most pressing one as we speak currently, and that's got to do with Mpox. Quite sadly, over 500 deaths recorded. Africa is at the center of it once again. So now that we're having a conversation, Africa is in the spotlight once more. And sadly, no African country has a vaccine for Mpox. Rather, we see dependency on countries like Denmark, France, and the likes. What do you think we need to do to avoid seeing an increase in death tolls? And most importantly, we've talked about partnerships. And do you think this is the wake-up call that Africa truly needs now?
Well, first and foremost, I would like to say that there is really no vaccine for Mpox. What you have are smallpox vaccines that were repurposed for Mpox. So that has to be underscored. Secondly, is vaccine the only path for effective prevention of disease? This is also not very true. So I think there have been, with the COVID-19 mentality, there has been this idea that, oh no, any disease that comes up, you have to vaccinate everybody. This is wrong. It didn't do. The US and most of the Western countries were highly vaccinated, but they had the highest deaths. So we cannot look at that. So this idea of that, oh no, vaccine is a magic bullet, and immediately any disease springs up, we vaccinate everybody against that disease. Really, no, that's not true. If you look at the data, the practical data will show you that vaccines did not do the job, even in the United States, where you will say that conditions were met. So I don't think that the path of prescribing vaccines as a panacea for all the new found infections is correct. The vaccines are useful for limited exposure in a vulnerable group. And this is not something you should prescribe for everybody. Everybody will be vaccinated for that disease. And of course, the data shows that it doesn't even work. So I think we have to do a rethinking. Now, how will we address the issues of shortfalls or new emerging diseases? We must look at things from a different perspective. Once a disease is a self-limiting disease and we can contain it where it came up, then you can almost discount the use of vaccines as a widespread measure. It can be only limited for that area where it is. And most of those things can be done within the communities that are there. So I don't think that there should be this whole COVID-19 very wrong psychology that we have to have vaccines to administer to everybody in case any emerging disease comes up. That is a wrong assumption.
Well, I mean, we want to say thank you. We do hope that Africa will soon be the hub, for vaccine development, and very quickly. Now, I know that we're out of time, but I must be able to point out a couple of things. We understand there's been an integrated vaccination campaign for yellow fever, measles, and HPV in Lagos State. Now, Dr. Alero, I understand that this has been scheduled for October 19 to 31st. So very quickly, because we're pressed for time, we have less than a minute just to give us an overview of this particular campaign for the sake of our viewers at home. Just sensitize them, please.
Oh, in less than a minute, that's going to not really. But again, we have to look at the fact that the last time we did a measles mass immunization campaign was 2022. In that period of time till now, a cohort of babies have been born who have reached the vulnerable age of 9 months, and they are not immunized. We are likely to see another measles outbreak. Ditto for the yellow fever as well. That we have this serious mosquito-borne viral disease, and we need to be able to vaccinate a vulnerable population that have grown since the last time we did this. We've been experiencing outbreaks since 2017, and we need to be able to have this mass immunization. Nobody needs illness in this challenging economy that we have nowadays. Regarding cervical cancer, before I run out of time, second leading cause of death among women, we're seeing it in younger and younger ages of women now. We're seeing women in their 30s and 40s succumbing to cervical cancer. The one cancer that can be prevented by vaccination. And while we don't want to legislate anybody's human behavior, getting the girls vaccinated against cervical cancer with the HPV is paramount. How'd I do?
All right.
Very well.
You did well. You did well.
Excellently well.
Good timing. Good timing. On that note, I want to say thank you to you both so much for sharing your insights with us today. Dr. Alero Roberts, who is the Associate Professor, College of Medicine, University of Lagos. And not forgetting Dr. Phillip Njemanze, Chairman, International Institute of Advanced Research and Training, Chidicon Medical Center. Thank you for your time, and we hope that you can still make service now that you're leaving us behind. Thank you. All right. It's been a fantastic conversation, no doubt. Thank you.